In his text, Ways of Seeing by John Berger, he comments that the way in which we see and interpret images, photographs, artworks, it's not objective because each individual person will have their own experience, which is based on their own cultural beliefs, their own individual experiences previously, social factors. But basically, the main point is that these images are not an objective representation of one thing because they can be interpreted in many different ways. And he goes on to say that visual perception as a whole is based on power structures. For example, gender dynamics and class hierarchies. And one of the main sort of things he speaks about in the text is that he wants a more critical and democratized way of viewing art, which focuses more on everyday life and less about sort of high culture as such. So yeah.
All right, so as Oscar was saying, Berger's text Ways of Seeing emphasizes the power structures that are embedded in art and in visual art. That visual art is not seen as a neutral tool depicting the average person's experience of the world back in historically, but it is a way in which the elite depict their own ideals of beauty, how life was back in the day. And this is related to Gramsci's concept of hegemony, which explains how dominant groups maintain their power by securing something known as spontaneous consent, which is the consent given by the masses, basically the approval given by the masses that is spontaneous in a way that people don't think about it, about giving this consent because they are, because they are primed due to the prestige and reputation of the elite to think in a certain way. It is also related to the dominant ideologies of Stuart Hall with preferred reading, negotiated reading, and oppositional reading, that the dominant group's ideology is seen as the common sense.
All right, so a couple of large-scale, real-world examples before we get into the more personal ones. As Oscar was just talking about, the way in which media, art, or messages are presented greatly impacts the way that we as an audience interpret them. Famous example, the Mona Lisa. Okay, so originally, Lisa's husband commissions the painting. He pays Leonardo da Vinci to paint her. It's supposed to be very intimate, very personal. Just fast forward to today, it's not seen so much as personal and intimate. It's seen as a global icon, artistic genius, symbol of the Renaissance era. In certain cases, it's a meme. It's just a pop culture reference now. And so it's not the same thing that it was originally meant to be when it was framed. Similarly, photograph, if you were to see a photograph in the news and it was a person crying, you wouldn't know if there was no text or no context or nothing that it was getting framed as. You wouldn't know whether it was tears of joy or tears of sadness. And so in this way, framework is vital into letting the audience interpret in their own way what a photo or an art piece or media or a message means.
To build off what Santi said, in American media, Asian Americans are often viewed through this mono-minority lens, or the stereotype where it's basically a stereotype where hard work equals success. They're overachievers or hard workers, and they're able to, they're able to achieve their success, like doctors or whatever. And although this framework is good, it's also bad because it kind of creates this pressure to always succeed and to kind of ignore issues like discrimination and mental health. And this can also lead to burnout. Personally, I felt burnout, not because of these stereotypes, but it's kind of uncommon to kind of sway away from these stereotypes, especially when people view in this kind of framework. And kind of if you kind of change a narrative, like for example, if you kind of shift the narrative instead of focusing more on the mono-minority, kind of focusing on the individual rather than the whole minority, or the whole majority. I feel like it can show other things like resilience and diversity, not just success. And as John Berger and as my other agreement says, the way we kind of see things is affected by what we know and what we believe, and how stories are told impact how society and Asian Americans view themselves, which can either foster stereotypes or can foster pride or can foster other things as well.